Welcome to Module 2, Invasion Pathways of Aquatic Species. We just learned the differences between a native, non-native, and invasive species. Now in this module, we're going to learn how non-native aquatic species get here. Sometimes it's by accident, sometimes it's on purpose, and sometimes it just happens naturally. There are ways to prevent many of these introductions, though. Let's take a look. Let's start by defining a pathway. A pathway is the method a non-native organism uses to enter the new introduced environment. How does a freshwater fish from Asia cross oceans and end up in Florida? How does a plant from out west make it across the Mississippi River? How do mussels from the Caspian Sea end up in the Great Lakes? Plants, fish, and mussels can't move that far and freely around the globe on their own. But people and cargo move all the time, either across state lines, country borders, or between continents. For example, seeds or tiny floating plants like water fern get stuck on a person's boots or waders. If they're not rinsed off before their next use, they can transfer those seeds or plants to the next water body they're used in. Non-native species will and can go wherever humans go. We may or may not know that we're transporting anything in the process. Improvements to technology, shipping time, shipping materials, and international travel have immensely increased the ability for humans and species to travel. Humans are the main reason non-native species move around the globe. Intentional pathways are actions that humans do on purpose to introduce a non-native species to a new area. This doesn't always mean that a person is doing it to purposely cause harm. Many times it's done without the person knowing the consequences. Since this is a module series on non-native aquatic species, we're going to focus on pathways for aquatic species. Intentional introductions that are legal include biocontrol, which is when you use one species to control or reduce the numbers of another species through predation or herbivory. Another example is stocking of sport fish by agencies to increase recreation and ecotourism. Intentional introductions that are illegal include dumping your aquarium, releasing pets into the wild, stocking of sport fish by anglers in public waters, possessing or releasing a non-native species for cultural reasons like a ceremony, and planting listed invasive plants in your personal ponds. Many non-native species are considered illegal to have and transport due to the risks involved, so check out FWC's webpage for information about owning and transporting non-native species. Unintentional pathways are accidental methods of introducing a non-native species by humans. Examples include an animal or plant escaping an aquaculture facility, ballast water exchange, which is the water taken in or released on large ships to counterweight their loads or lack thereof, which can transport and release organisms into port. Biofouling on vessels traveling across oceans and seas, and anglers and boaters unknowingly having seeds, plants, or larvae on their boots, waders, boats, buckets, lures, and other fishing equipment. Be sure to rinse your kayaks, canoes, paddleboards, and jet skis also. When humans change habitats, like diverting or connecting waterways, species can spread to new areas. We've talked about how humans can move and introduce non-native species, but non-native species can also move on their own. Climate change will impact weather patterns, frequency and amount of precipitation, and the number of days below freezing. This will give species opportunities to change their range, either seasonally or long-term. Natural disasters such as hurricanes can move or introduce non-native species. Flooding on the coast or inland can connect water bodies to each other. It can push species further inland to places they wouldn't have been able to reach on their own. Or they could have floated in on debris and ended up in a new place. Hitchhikers such as seeds, pathogens, and parasites can use other organisms as a means to move to new places. Prevention is key. It is easier to prevent the introduction of invasive species than to manage them later after they've been established and spread. Boaters and anglers are highly encouraged to clean their vessel, trailer, and all equipment before leaving one water body and entering another. Drain your vessel, the bilge pump, ballast water tanks, portable bait containers, live wells, and bait wells before leaving the boat ramp. If you have any unused bait like minnows and worms, do not dump them in the water. Instead, discard unused bait in the trash. Next time you're at the boat ramp, take some time to read the signs. Some of them may provide tips for preventing the spread of aquatic invasive species. If you're in the aquaculture industry or work for a stocking agency in Florida, the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services has a manual of best management practices to follow to prevent negative impacts to the area surrounding your facility and to reduce the escape of any species. If you're a pet owner or an aquarium hobbyist with a pet you can't care for anymore, what do? You should not release any pets into the wild. Instead, you can rehome it, return it to the pet store, check out FWC's Exotic Pet Amnesty Program to surrender your pet to a qualified adopter that can provide the pet with a new home, or check with your veterinarian about humane euthanasia. When you first start thinking about getting a pet, think about the size it'll grow to, its age, life expectancy, how it interacts with other pets or tank mates, what it eats, how much it costs to take care of it throughout its life, and any other specific requirements. This will help you decide if the pet is right for you now and in the future. If you have a pond in your yard, plant native species instead of non-native species. To learn more about specific non-native and invasive species, how to identify and report them, and how to prevent the spread of them, go online to check out the websites and social media accounts of your local county extension office, the UF IFAS Center for Aquatic and Invasive Plants, UF IFAS Invasive Species Council, Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, U.S. Geological Survey, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. There are numerous resources out there for you to protect yourself, personal property, hobbies, and your waterways. This graphic is called the invasion curve. It shows the amount of time, the area infested with the invasive species, the control costs involved at each stage of the invasion, and the management goal that is feasible at each stage. Let's start at the left. This is the prevention stage. No area is infested because an invasive species doesn't exist in this area. The control costs are slim to none, and control costs are the costs it takes to reduce or get rid of the invasive species. If we move one step to the right, there's an introduction of an invasive species, but there are only a few number of individuals, and they're in a small, localized population. Eradication may be possible while the area infested is small. The cost to eradicate them is low. Eradication is the complete removal of the population. If eradication wasn't possible, because maybe the individuals couldn't be found, the control method didn't work, or maybe no one even knew they existed at this point in time, then we move to the right on the curve to containment. That small population has now grown rapidly. The number of individuals are high, and the area of infestation is much larger. Since eradication is unlikely at this stage, now the goal is to contain the invasive species to their current locations. The cost of containment is higher than eradication and prevention. Let's say time passes and the containment attempts failed, unfortunately. The invasive species is now widespread, and there are just too many individuals at this point. At this stage of the invasion curve, the goal is called asset-based protection and long-term management. This costs the most and is the most difficult option, but it's the last resort. Biologists aim to suppress or reduce the population to the lowest achievable levels and protect valuable resources and property. This is why prevention is the most important step in the invasion curve and the most cost-effective solution to invasive species management. Can you see why controlling an aquatic invasive species is challenging? Detection, containment, and control can be difficult in the water and costly. So this is why we all need to do our best to prevent introductions. I encourage each of you to take the time to explore these websites and even follow some of the agencies mentioned previously on social media. Look through the pictures and names of invasive species in Florida, learn how to recognize them, and download a reporting app. There's help with what to do if you have an invasive species on your private land, and what to do with your pet when you want or need to give it up. The UF IFAS Tropical Aquaculture Laboratory website has helpful resources about non-native species and those interested or invested in aquaculture.